Hey, I video. That's all I got.
Okay.
That's all I got. We can move it down or put it down here. Like that. How about that?
Yep.
Good one.
And if we need to bring it back,
Yeah.
okay, that works. And let's,
You want to expand it, you get.
yeah, no, I think if you keep it this way, I think this will be good. Okay. Sounds good.
Good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock, so we're ready to get started if you are. I'm very excited to be here today. We are just thrilled about the turnout, and we're so happy that all of you could attend in person. We're very excited to have all of you here, and we're looking forward to an exciting workshop. My name is Edgar Kraus. I'm a research engineer with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, and I have the distinct pleasure to just introduce all of you to what we're doing as part of this research project. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we're recording this first portion of our workshop. The whole morning portion is going to be recorded, and there's also a Zoom meeting happening at the same time, so people can listen in and ask questions to all the panels that we have. I also wanted to just make a distinction here real quick. This is the third workshop of 3 that we're conducting. And today is all the activities are part of a research project that we are conducting for TxDOT. So this is not a TxDOT workshop. It's really a workshop that's part of a research project, and it's a little bit separate from the whole Navy program. But we are working on developing strategies for TxDOT, and that's why we're here today to talk to you and get ideas from you, and it just create a forum where we can identify stakeholder needs. So with that, let me see if this works. Well, that does not work. Here we go. Okay. So the way we have this workshop set up today, we'll have a brief introduction to the research project that we're conducting, and then we will start off with a panel of exciting speakers that are going to tell us a little bit about what MPOs are doing in the area of electric vehicle infrastructure. And then we'll take a little bit of a break, and we'll have a second panel where we talk about freight, fleet, multi-housing, and also have a Q&A after that. We had a last minute cancellation on our second panel, so we'll probably shift the timeline a little bit because we'll probably won't need all that time for the second panel. But hopefully we'll be done around noon. Then we have a, hopefully we have our lunch that'll be brought here and set up in the back around that time. And then in the afternoon, we have what we're really excited about, our breakout groups. So we have 4 topics that we want to discuss. So the way we have set this up is we're going to have two breakout sessions in this room, and then we have 2 other rooms outside. And I hope everybody kind of indicated when they got in on what you're interested in. But we have a break, and then we have a second breakout because we wanted to give people a chance to move around and just go through like maybe a different topic if they're interested. So it's up to you what you want to join, but we're very excited about the breakouts, and hopefully we'll get a lot of ideas and have an opportunity to exchange, and talk about issues that everybody's facing. Around 3:15 or so, we'll have a group report back. So we'll all join back in this room, and then we will have our facilitators talk about the main issues that have been discussed, so everybody gets an idea of what happened during the breakout sessions. And then roughly 4 o'clock, we should be able to wrap this workshop up today. So that's our plan in a nutshell. Just wanted to briefly talk about the actual research project that we're conducting. So this is a TxDOT research project. We just changed the title a little bit to make sure that it's really distinct from the Navy activities that TxDOT is undertaking. So we're now focusing on freight, fleet, and multifamily housing, but we really want to get everybody's idea on all the topics that we have listed on those breakouts. Essentially, what we're tasked with is to develop a electric vehicle long-term strategic plan, and we have several objectives there as part of this research, which is to guide the development of the EV infrastructure in Texas. We want to meet the needs of all the EV stakeholders as part of the strategic plan. We want to also maximize financial opportunities available to Texas. So it seems like every other week there's a new announcement on a new funding initiative. So we're tracking that and we're summarizing that. And we want to make sure that all the different cities, MPOs, towns, and other local transportation agencies have all the information that they need to maximize the funding that will ultimately go to Texas. We also want to provide guidance on the effective and equitable distribution of infrastructure funding, because that will play a large role in several of those programs that are just being announced, the federal programs. So our overall goal is to help and contribute to a stable and consistent EV charging network throughout Texas. I want to make sure that I mention all the people who are involved in this project. I think they deserve a lot of credit. We have Lori Clark here today, who's hosting the meeting for us. So we're very appreciative of that. Ryan Granger, who's going to give us a little talk in a few minutes. But there's also a whole bunch of other people who couldn't make it today, and they are also very essential to provide feedback and guide this this whole research project. So I wanted to make sure that you're aware of all these folks. These are the people who are working on our side. So this is a large effort that involves lots of people, and we have some of them today here helping with the facilitation of the workshop, but just wanted to make sure that everybody deserves the credit and for the contributions to this important work. Ultimately, I think what's going to be important to or more of interest to people attending today are the expected research products. So we have distinct products that we are going to deliver at the end of this project, which is going to be at the end of the next fiscal year. The first is an assessment of EV planning analysis tools. That is going to be a summary of tools that are available to you and that you can use in your EV planning analysis. So we're currently looking at all different types of tools to determine how they can be used during EV planning infrastructure and how they can be used by different folks, what kind of data requirements are behind those tools, and how can they be useful. We're also developing an EV policy analysis framework that's essentially a summary of the policy that is behind all the EV infrastructure development, and that will help you basically provide an overview of all the different programs and how they can benefit Texas, how you can apply for this funding, and what can be done to improve or extend EV infrastructure in Texas. And then finally, we'll have a document where we summarize long-term statewide EV infrastructure strategies. So that will be a guidance on how TxDOT and the state should approach EV infrastructure based on our research and based on the workshops that we're conducting today. So today is where we really want to hear from everyone about their concerns, about their needs. How can we interact with you, and how can you help us develop those strategies and guidance? The research project itself is currently working on task 3, which are the stakeholder workshops that I mentioned. So we had a virtual one, and then we had one in Austin, and today is the third and the last one with NCT COG here today. After that, we have a couple more tasks, which are basically geared towards rounding out the project and developing those products that I just mentioned. So just so that everybody understands what we're trying to accomplish today, we have several objectives for the workshop. The first one is to discuss TxDOT's plan for the statewide EV charging. And so Ryan is going to give us an overview on the latest and greatest on what TxDOT is doing in that area. But we're also tasked to identify the stakeholder needs, identify what are the activities that are happening at the MPOs, towns, and other transportation agency. What are planned activities? What are concerns? We also want to discuss the EV policy considerations that have just been published, gather feedback on potential implementation strategies, including financial strategies. So we want to hear from you. What is it you're planning to do? How are you going to go about it? What are some of the roadblocks, and where can we help, or what are things that you need to be successful in this area? And finally, we also want to identify opportunities to coordinate activities among stakeholders. So we want to see if there's maybe a need for an additional forum, or is there other opportunities where stakeholders can come together and make the EV infrastructure implementation a success in Texas. So just want to give you a brief recap. I see some of the faces today I've seen before, so I'm very happy that you joined us again. We had, as I was mentioning, 2 workshops. The first one we did virtually. We had about 100 people attending that. We had some really good presentations, I think. And we had 7 or so breakout sessions that were all virtual, where we collected our first round of information. Then we had our second workshop at TxDOT, and we had, again, very good presentations from TxDOT, Harris County, Houston Galveston Area Council, Harris County Toll Road Authority. And then we narrowed the breakouts down a little bit more based on what we saw on our first virtual workshop. Here are just a couple of things I wanted to highlight. When we went over our notes and our summaries of all the breakouts and discussions, here are some of the things that kind of seemed to pique the interest of the people who attended. So there was a lot of interest about the details of TxDOT's NEVI plan. What is the build-out priority? What is the funding about funding for operations and maintenance? How's it going to work? We also talked about challenges to the electrical grid, electricity cost, reliability. So a lot of people interested in those topics. There was a little bit talk about charging infrastructure for fleet vehicles, but we didn't really have a large group. So we're hoping that today we can maybe zero in on that topic a little bit more, and hopefully we'll have some people who have some contribution in that area. We talked about lack of standardized communication infrastructure, electric cooperatives, forecasting revenues, planning info, TxDOT support in that area. And finally, there was also a couple of people who said, well, we have this Clean Cities Coalition, which is great for like larger MPOs or larger towns, but some of the smaller areas outside of the big cities that felt like they're a little bit left behind or left out of this. So they were thinking, maybe it would be good to have something similar to the Clean Cities type coalition, but focus on smaller areas. So this is basically a couple of the highlights that we got from our first 2 workshops. And that kind of summarizes what we are trying to accomplish today, what we're trying to accomplish with the research project. And that's all I had for you. Are there any questions? I'd be happy to answer them. Yes. The research product will be delivered at the end of the next fiscal year, which is summer of 24. So we have like a phase 1 where we provide preliminary results. It's going to be in the summer. We already delivered some minor milestone products like the literature review, and we're going to summarize information from the workshop that's going to be due next month. But the main product, the strategy guide itself, that's going to be at the end of the next fiscal year. Sure.
One additional quick housekeeping thing. When you have questions, since we are recording, to make sure we catch the audio on the questions, if you'll hit the little talkie face on the microphones, if you're at the table till the little red light comes on. Yep, there you go. That'll pick up the audio. And then if you're in the back, there's a few spots up here at the tables, close to microphones in case anybody wants to move. But we also have that freestanding mic. So please leverage that as well. Thank you.
I got a question. So the program you're developing is from boots on the ground, inception all the way up, what you're analyzing, correct? So from inception of a city that has nothing all the way to kind of the roadmap, was that what's being worked on? Do I understand that right?
We're trying to provide guidance to like a strategic plan on how to approach the EV infrastructure implementation. So we're not looking into like engineering specification or anything specific or location analysis, but we're looking into, for example, the tools that can provide location analysis. So what are the tools that cities MPOs can use to apply for the funding? And there's another program that you probably have heard of. We're going to talk about the discretionary funding program that will be not administered by TxDOT, will be going straight through grants.gov, where the MPOs can just apply for any amount of the 2.5 billion that's going to be available. Once the standards and specifications for the application is going to be published. So we will provide hopefully the tools that help the cities and the local transportation agencies to make successful applications. And we're also looking for feedback from you where TxDOT can provide information or data that you need in the format that you need. So we want to hear from you, like what can TxDOT do to help in the process?
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, no more questions. Then I would say let's get started on our first panel. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Grossman, and yeah, take it away.
Great, thanks. Yeah, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and start with a panel talking about public sector efforts. We're going to start with Ryan Granger from TxDOT, and then hear from a couple of different MPOs across the state. So we're going to introduce each speaker and then hold questions until the end for all of the speakers at once. So Ryan, who we'll hear from first, has been with TxDOT for almost 9 years, including in government affairs, transportation planning and programming, and now in strategic planning. He was deputy project manager of TxDOT's long range plan and now manages its strategic plan, as well as co-leads the NEVI program at Texas DOT. Originally from Long Beach, California, before coming to TxDOT, he worked at the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress for 6.5 years, where he specialized in industry, business, and transportation. And Ryan, you should be able to hopefully find your presentation up there fairly easily.
All right. Thanks a lot, Alice.
Great.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right. All right, there we go. So again, my name is Ryan Granger with Texas Department of Transportation, and today, as Edgar said, a lot of the activities for this research project, complement the NEVI plan that TxDOT put together. So I'm going to go through that right now and let you know what's in that, what we've gotten done, what we're doing, and what we expect to do in the future. So just beginning at the beginning, this all started with the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed onto law on November 15th, 2021, established a $5 billion National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI, formula program, and as Edgar mentioned, the $2.5 billion discretionary grant program to establish a network of about 500,000 electric vehicle or EV chargers by 2030. That's the overall goal. And the overarching goal of the program is really to ensure that there's a convenient, reliable, affordable, and accessible charging experience for all users. And with TxDOT as a pass-through entity, Texas receives $407.8 million for fiscal years 2022 through 2026. And not that it's a competition, but we did get more money than anybody else. It's just a fact. But anyway, and it's worth noting that even though we receive those funds in those years, the funds are available until expended. So this is not 5 years of funding, but it's not a 5-year program. It's going to be around a lot longer than that. So the funds will be split between federal and state, very traditional 80 and 20% respectively. And very untraditionally, though, private sector third parties are going to be able to pay the state's share, and TxDOT, like most other state DOTs, is going to do that. So about the program itself, the Federal Highway Administration, anticipates that most states will contract with private entities for the installation, operation, and maintenance of the EV charging infrastructure. So, TxDOT is the same. We will not be owning it. We're just going to be passing through the funds. You can kind of think of these funds as seed money for industry a little bit. And first of all, it's done in stages, with the first stage being along the alternative fuel corridors, which in Texas, this is basically the interstate highways. They're one and the same. So those being public roads, that needs to be built out first before we can go off the interstates to rural areas, to metropolitan areas. And, in this endeavor, we've had a lot of help from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ, the Comptroller State Energy Conservation Office, or SECO, and they were our partners with this. And so, it was really great working with them, and in some cases, building on their successes, in some cases, learning from their mistakes, but they signed off on it along with TxDOT. And here's some of the key dates, just kind of giving a look back. Last March, we launched our landing page on a social engagement site called Social Pinpoint. And this is something that actually we were just going to do for the plan itself, but we're going to keep up because it's so cool. You can go in there, you can actually recommend placement of certain chargers. You can say, hey, one right here would be fantastic. Why would you put one there? That's kind of dumb. And you can make comments. You can, so we'll be keeping that up, and that's really going to come into play and come in handy, especially when the program gets to the metropolitan areas and some of the rural areas, so that we can use that information, harness that to make some decisions about where to put the chargers. So getting back to the key dates, May 23rd, we were the first state to put out our draft plan, and so we did that as early as we could to try to get an idea from industry and stakeholders what direction we were going with. I think by the end we had about 56 drafts. so looking back, the first one was pretty rough, but we got it out there early and got it out of the way. We had a virtual public meeting June 7th. On June 14th, we had a multi-state tribal outreach and consultation. And on June 22nd, we had that's when our comment deadline closed for our virtual public meeting. And July 28th was the big day. We submitted it 2 whole days early to FHWA. We were hoping to be the first. New Mexico beat us. But when you're trying to get 3 agencies in Texas to agree on anything, it just takes a while. So on September 27th, the plan got approved by the Federal Highway Administration. And on October 11th, the FHWA apportioned $86.8 million for fiscal year 23. So as far as the timeline goes, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but phase 1 will focus on the building out of the alternative fuel corridors to meet the FHWA guidance. Phase 2, once that's all built out, we will be moving over to county seats in rural areas, and also within the boundaries of federally designated metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs. And this is a little bit of a breakdown of how that funding breaks down. So the alt fuel corridors that I mentioned get about 12% of our overall funds. County seats get roughly about 40%, and inside the MPOs, that's going to get about 50%. And all this, as you can kind of see, if you have really eagle eyes, it says where that is in the plan. All of this stuff is in the plan. So, feel free to take a look. Now, as far as where they're going to go, before we decided where to put them, we had to know where they were, because the federal guidelines say that we have to put them every 50 miles along the interstates. So here what you can see is in the orange, those were existing DC fast charge stations that met the NEVI guidance. In gray, you can see the Volkswagen settlement DC fast charging stations that also meet NEVI guidance. And let's see, and in the blue, those are the 55 or 56 odd stations that we'll be putting in for phase 1 along the interstates. So they are going, we're being, this is what it'll look like once that phase is all built out. It's hard to say how long that is going to take. We've had probably about 500 meetings with stakeholders over the last year. I know a lot of them are in the room. And what we've garnered is that it can take anywhere between 6 months to 18 months to fully build out a location. So remains to be seen how long that might take. Now here, I've added some stations in some of the rural areas and to kind of show what that builds out, what that looks like over time. And this is what the build out looks like, we hope, after 5 years. It's worth noting that this does not include any of the locations within the MPOs. Those, just like traditional road and bridge projects, we always work with our MPO partners. They know their areas better than we do. And we will be working on with them on those locations. But here what we have is all the locations in those rural county seats that I mentioned and along the alternative fuel corridors. So as you can see, because counties in Texas are, kind of evenly spaced and a little bit blocky. Actually, this is kind of a good approach. Average spacing between them is about 75 miles. And, once this is built out, you'll have a hard time getting through Texas without stumbling across, a few of our EV charging stations. So as far as next steps go, right now we are coordinating with FHWA on opening up the program. But we do have tons and tons of resources, and we are always adding to them. Here you can kind of see our webpage for the NEVI plan and program. It's got tons and tons of resources, including a dashboard up in the right-hand corner that shows all of the EV charging in Texas. This is partly how we're going to be measuring the performance of the program over time, is to look at these locations. And this breaks it down by owner, by the charge rate, and it's updated about every couple weeks. And down below, you can see the map. This is our statewide planning map. This is a great tool. You can toggle on layers like our electric alternative fuel corridors or MPO boundaries, disadvantaged census tracts. So that's a great tool. All that is linked under resources on that webpage. We've also added some new shiny things like some ArcGIS story maps. They're a little bit more attractive than our TxDOT webpage template and a little easier to go through. That's a good place to start. So tons of resources. There's everything we use to do the plan is up there. There's no secret sauce. We've put it all out there. And if you have any questions, this is usually the best way to reach us. TxDOT_NEVI at texdot.gov. There's only 2 of us working on this. So, if the easiest way to get a fast response is emailing us at that email. And of course, I'll be here all day. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ryan. And we're going to get to questions later also. So if you have questions, please jot them down and we'll circle back. But next we're going to hear from Lori Clark. Lori Pample Clark joined the Transportation Department of North Central Texas Council of Governments in July of 2005. She oversees various programs and policies to improve air quality with a focus on expanding use of clean vehicles and alternative fuels, with increasing focus on zero tailpipe emissions technology. Their work also includes energy efficiency and renewable energy, which will become increasingly important as transportation electrifies. She serves as director for the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition, which is hosted within the NCTCOG and designated by the Department of Energy as the local coalition supporting the National Clean Cities Program. Lori received her bachelor's degree in environmental studies and political science from Baylor University and is an active member of the board of Keep Grapevine Beautiful. So Lori, you can go ahead and your presentation should also be loaded right up there for you. I think it's gonna be, yep, that one.
Good morning again, everybody. And thanks again for coming out. Appreciate it. And I, from an MPO perspective, want to say thank you to TxDOT for the collaboration and how strong the partnership has been working through as far as we've gotten so far in terms of NEVI development. So I think they've really done a great job. And working with Clean Cities coalitions around the country, can say with great confidence that our state is one of the leaders in this area. So I want to talk a little bit about our perspective from being an MPO, also being a Clean Cities Coalition, specifically for the Dallas-Fort Worth area, in terms of what we're considering in terms of EV charging infrastructure development in general, but also looking at NEVI. So for anybody who doesn't know us, I did want to just kind of frame the who we are a little bit. So we are the regional planning agency for a 16-county area. And that is for anything ranging from transportation, water quality, water quantity, solid waste, things like that, air quality. We are the designated metropolitan planning organization for 12 of those counties. So working with TxDOT, using federal transportation funds to do transportation planning for that 12-county area. And within those 12 counties, 10 of those counties are designated non-attainment for the pollutant ozone. So really, when we look at air quality, when we look at programs and projects to try to improve our air quality situation, we're looking from the lens of transportation, and transportation being the root cause of about 2/3 of the ozone forming pollution that we have in the region. So that's that air quality transportation connection. And the dots that you see on the map there are the ozone monitors that we have locally. And then our third hat is the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. And we have been the designated coalition since the mid-90s. We went to the Department of Energy as the MPO in an ozone non-attainment area because alternative fuel vehicles have always had lower rates of ozone forming pollutants than traditional gasoline and diesel. So that was one of the main drivers behind getting that Department of Energy designation and really pushing adoption of cleaner vehicle technologies as one of our primary air quality activities. And of course, electrification is now kind of the poster child for what that looks like. So I do want to highlight, we have 3 other coalitions in Texas, one in San Antonio hosted at Alamo Area Council of Governments, one in the Austin area. It's a Lone Star Clean Fuels Alliance. They're an independent nonprofit. And then Houston Galveston Area Council hosts the Houston Galveston Coalition, which of course serves Houston Galveston. And I do want to pick up on the point that Dr. Krause made about the need for Clean Cities coalitions to cover the rest of the state, because it is a little bit of a patchwork, and we're aware of that. That is something that is very near and dear to the Department of Energy's heart right now, is to expand the reach of Clean Cities coalitions to serve everybody in the country. So that includes the rural areas, connecting the urban cores that have a Clean Cities coalition right now. 3 of the 4 of our agencies are hosted in political subdivisions of the state. So expanding our boundaries gets a little bit tricky, but that's something that we're interested in talking to people about. If there's anybody who wants to be a champion for growing a Clean Cities coalition in an area outside of one of these 4, please see me. So we can talk about that and what that entails and the process and what it might look like to work with the Department of Energy and collaborate with the rest of us. So shout out to that. So as a coalition and my team, and we've got 14 members here today, so I want to acknowledge them and have them wave or stand. And they're looking very embarrassed now. So Jocelyn Billings, Jared Wright, and Amy Hodges. Amy, okay, Amy's in the back. So want to acknowledge all of them, and we're all here to work on all of this stuff together. And these are kind of the key focus areas: our fleet and driver guidance and planning, infrastructure planning and readiness, and energy integration. And it just occurred to me a couple of days ago, and this is probably really cheesy, but we always talk about vehicle adoption as being chicken and egg, and you need the vehicles, but you need the infrastructure, and they have to go hand in hand. So I was like, oh, we have the chicken, we have the egg, and we have the coop, which is the energy integration, which is kind of that energy framework that all of the rest of it has to fit into. How do we integrate with the grid and things like that, and work with our utilities? So I wanted to flag that, and also kind highlight why, from a transportation planning perspective, this is so important. A lot of, you may remember soon after the new administration was elected, GM was one of the first automakers to come out with a big splashy announcement. We are going to do X by X date. And all of these other auto manufacturers started following suit. So I want to shout out to Jared on our team because he's the one who had the brainchild behind trying to visualize all of those automaker announcements. And if you look at the year 2030, that is like this watershed year for all of these OEM commitments to be carbon neutral or net zero or only zero emission vehicle or only battery electric vehicle, whatever flavor their commitment took. 2030 lines up really clearly. And 2030 is like tomorrow when you're talking about planning infrastructure, right? Infrastructure takes a while to build, it takes a while to plan. And so there's a sense of urgency on our part. One, because there's all this federal money and there's this huge investment and we have to get it right. And two, because we're facing this ticking clock. So we know that this doesn't mean all the vehicles on the road will be electrified or net zero or whatever by 2030, but just looking at where the automakers are taking us, and regardless of where federal policy turns in the future, this ship has started to steer. The industry has started to make these changes themselves. So some of the work that we do involves just looking at the data and looking at the trends. We have a poster in the back that you can look at as well, which is kind of a blown up version of this. But I will flag one of the interactive websites that Ryan mentioned. There's a QR code on the bottom of that poster. If you want to provide a comment on that TxDOT map on like, here's where I think a charging station should be, or here's where I think it really should not be, that QR code is on the bottom of that poster. So during the break, feel free to go back there and scan that and provide that feedback. And we'll be working with TxDOT to pull that feedback for our urban area to see what our regional planning might look like. But some of the things that we look at is registration data on electric vehicles. We buy the registration data from DMV. I'm not going to elaborate on that process other than it's messy. But we have the data for the entire state by city, by county, by zip code. So anybody is able to use it. It's posted on our website. So we invite everybody to use that to the degree that it's helpful to you. We also overlay that with charging stations. And what's notable to me about the map of where registration currently is it's almost statewide. There's very, very few, this is by zip code. There are very few zip codes in the state of Texas that don't have any electric vehicles at this point. So it's really a technology that is, of course, more pronounced in the urban areas, but has really wide appeal. And we see it starting to tick up all over the state of Texas. Digging into our region a little bit, one of the things that we look at is the distribution of infrastructure, and we know that it's not evenly distributed. We think the private sector, for all of the work that they've done investing in charging stations so far, it's been great. But there are certainly areas of our region that are kind of being left behind, where there's not been a lot of investment thus far. We know we have a lot of multifamily residents. You're going to hear more about that later. And some of the specific evaluation that's been done on that, but just looking sheer county by county, there's a really wide discrepancy. And so one of the things that we hope to do with the NEVI money is try to even this out a little bit. What that looks like, we don't know. Are we looking at a metric per capita? Are we looking at a metric based on distance? We need input from stakeholders like all of you and guidance from TxDOT and from federal highways on what an appropriate performance measure should be. So that we can be moving towards kind of a quantitative objective with qualitative inputs. So when we think a little bit more about NEVI and what that might mean for our region, once TxDOT completes phase 1 and builds out the interstates, our region is fortunate to receive $64.5 million allocated to our 12 county area for construction and installation. When we were thinking all of this was going to be spent on DC fast charge stations, I was really roughly ballparking maybe 70 to 80 sites in DFW or in our 12 county MPA boundary that would be built with that money. And so it's our job to recommend to TxDOT, excuse me, where those 70 to 80 sites might be. Now that we know that we have some flexibility to potentially also build level 2 charging stations, it could be many more locations. So that's the job that's in front of us, is doing some analysis with our stakeholders on our 12 county area and figuring out where do we need to add charging stations. So on this map, you can see the blue dots that TxDOT has already identified as studying areas that they will build. All of the green and orange are stations that already exist. So if we're going to throw another 70 or 80 dots on this map, where should they be? The red lines are highways that are part of the national highway system, but they're not part of the federal highway designated corridor network. So at the outset, we're thinking those are major secondary highways. If you live in the region, you recognize State Highway 114, State Highway 121, State Highway 360. They get traveled just as heavily as interstates, even though they're not interstates. We definitely need stations on those routes. Stations that connect our region to other areas like US 175 going down to East Texas. We probably need more than just that one location that's in Kaufman right now. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about, and also the need to engage with the public and plan equitably. What does that mean for us, right? Equity is a really hot buzzword at the moment, but providing some specificity around how that should be interpreted is something that we need a lot of input from everybody on. And then we also acknowledge that NEVI is not going to fill all of our infrastructure needs. First and foremost, we know we need level 2 charging throughout the community. NEVI, now we know we have some flexibility. It might give us some, but it probably won't give us enough. Although there's a lot of debate now about how much level 2 public charging do you need versus DC fast charge, and where do you end up in terms of the balance? And then medium and heavy duty. We think there's a real big need to move medium and heavy duty vehicles from what they traditionally are right now, which is diesel, very high polluting, to a zero emissions platform. And traditional infrastructure, traditional charging stations, as you can see in this picture, if you can see the picture, I know it's shady, doesn't work well geometrically. Trucks need a different layout. And so how do we build that? Part of the reason that we think medium and heavy duty is so important is because it has a very disproportionate impact on our ozone situation. You can see freight in particular, if you look at combination short haul trucks, combination long haul trucks is about 75% of the NOx emissions in our region that come from medium and heavy duty vehicles. So if we can electrify freight, looking at delivery trucks that come back to base within the region, we can make a big impact. We actually, this past fall, just finished up an I-45 corridor plan outlining where we think infrastructure maybe should be to serve the freight sector. So this is something that we would really like to see maybe coming out of this research project, is more guidance on that medium and heavy duty sector. I will also mention, Dr. Krause mentioned the competitive discretionary funding, 2.5 billion. The first 700 million of that is coming imminently. We intend to apply or partner with others to apply. So we're looking for partners on that to pursue something on the corridor side for medium and heavy duty charging or hydrogen fueling infrastructure. And with that, that's all I've got. So thank you.
Thank you, Lori. And again, please jot down your questions and we'll circle back. But next, we're going to hear from Martin Lucero from the Lubbock MPO. Martin is the Assistant Director of the Lubbock Metropolitan Planning Organization in Lubbock, Texas. He contributes to the development of MPO goals, objectives, policies, processes, and procedures required to provide transportation planning services. His work has centered on long-range transportation plans, transit, pedestrian, bicycle special studies, GIS analysis, planning, and coordination. He has more than 20 years of experience in transportation planning and has worked in both local and regional government, mostly serving as the transportation planning manager for the city of Surprise, as well as in recent regional organizations such as the Central Arizona Government and Farmington Metropolitan Planning Organization. Mr. Lucero received his Master's of Public Administration from Brigham Young University with a concentration in community redevelopment. And take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I can almost just sit down and just let this kind of go on. That was great. I'm not too sure what more I can add to it, except for, we're trying to catch up where we're at. So I actually have a unique perspective from more of a West Coast perspective, I guess. Let me just say, I came from an area where it was actually mandated by county regs that there was going to be an air quality manager for any public entity and also an air quality manager for any employer that had over a certain amount of I guess, employees within a certain building size, and we had to make reports every month, as well as have goals and electrification plans and set and in place. And so coming from Arizona, I took a really interesting perspective in the sense I wore not only the planning manager hat, I also was the air quality manager for the city as well as the EV individual. And so I took the opportunity to be able to electrify not only through solar panels, a lot of our parking stations, but also apply those down into charging stations for a lot of the employees that were there. And so from that aspect, I really wanted to kind of bring that viewpoint of not only managing ozone, but PM2, PM10 from my previous locations, and actually try to take that and try to see what we could do in West Texas. The issue that we had though was we didn't have a really good grip of what was the existing policies. And so from that aspect, I bet you there's a lot of individuals here in this room who have kind of struggled with that as well, or at least in the rural parts of Texas, and not knowing exactly, what are the barriers out there? What are the challenges, and what are some of the opportunities? Because really, it's not just the barriers or the challenges that we have to worry about. It's actually coordinating all those opportunities. And so understanding how to coordinate those existing policies, encourage or implement and make those deployments in the correct manner. And the only reason I bring that up is when you take a look at it, really, as far as Lubbock is concerned in West Texas, we're a weird duck. Okay. And when I say a weird duck, it's great coming down here, man. It's, just in my hotel, there's EV charging stations there. I went over to go get a donut this morning, I had extra time, and I went over there and I drove my big truck, because out in West Texas, you have to have a big truck. And so unfortunately I wasn't very, environmentally conscious, but, I went over there, and right across the street, there was a Tesla charging station at a donut joint. And so I started laughing. I'm like, well, we have a little bit more of a jump to do, but in West Texas, as far as Lubbock is concerned, we're growing at a clip that is almost equal to what's found here in the Dallas Metroplex. And so when you consider that, what are we putting in? What are we constructing, and how are we constructing our infrastructure, our homes, the businesses? How are we planning? And so those are some of the opportunities that we have right now. However, from a transportation standpoint, I can't affect it, right? A lot of people say, you're a transportation guy, or you're an engineer, put your hands over your ears, what can we say and what can we do? But I want to challenge everybody in this room to be able to say, yeah, no, that's not right. We can, and we should, because when you think about it, when anybody who sits on your boards, anybody who sits on your transportation committees and on your policy committees, anybody that you're engaging with, whenever you do a PPP or do your long range plan or your stakeholder meetings or your coordination, those are individuals who actually have their hands on the policy agenda. And so in order to promote the electrification of Texas, at least in West Texas, the way that we're approaching it is we're going to get ready to go ahead and put our feet on the ground and actually go out and update all our major planning documents. And in that process, we're going to bring in all the stakeholders, and we're going to try to promote how can we better facilitate and prepare for the impacts of the new vehicles that are being designed, the new impacts that are coming out. And so let me go ahead and give you a kind of discussion of that. We're getting ready for trying to go ahead, and we're going to plan and try to encourage new construction standards to bring it up to the new codes. Trying to kind of bring out the fact that we can ask for a change in parking standards. And so, when you consider parking standards and constructions, a lot of times the first thing that kind of goes, okay, we need 10 ADA spaces, so we get our handicap placards up, and we need to get those as close as the building. And now that, shopping's a big deal online, we need to make sure that we allow all the shopping stores to have their 20 spaces to kind of, you drive up and you park and they bring your groceries out to you, right? And then we're doing all that. But what if we went ahead and we asked them, hey, instead of having 10 ADA parking spaces, when there's only 6 required, can we make 2 of those EVs? Right? And can you put those the closest up to the front door? So you kind of give them, a little bit, of that privilege, or instead of having 30 basket parking, waiting for your groceries to get delivered to you, maybe you have 2 of those 30, from the big box stores, and you encourage the big box stores to put that in there. And then not only that, but then what do we do for the new homes that are being built, right? And so really you can't mandate that every new home builder go out there and they put in, homes that are already EV capable charging, but we can mandate that they're already equipped and ready to be able to have solar conversions or battery pack installations into their homes. So that way, when it comes in, we already know that those homes are equipped with sufficient power lines and power sufficient to be able to not bring down our network. And these were some of the policy agendas that we've already kind of engaged and started talking. It was kind of interesting. We brought in our electrical grid individual into one of our tech meetings. And he was just sitting there, and he pulled me to the side. And he goes, "You realize we're only about 3% away from failing our grid in Lubbock?" And I started laughing. I'm like, "Well, how do you know that?" He goes, "Well, we know where all the permits are being pulled, and we're starting to get ready, because if we don't get ready now, and all of a sudden everybody wants to put in a charging station at their house, what's going to happen? Are we going to be capable? Can we do that?" And so they're worried on their end. And so they're seeing the impacts of our transportation decisions here. And so those are the policy agendas that you need to kind of go out and get in front of. Is it a transportation issue? Yes and no, right? But is it something that we should be thinking about? Is it something that we should be doing? And so that's the unique perspective that I gained going from the West Coast, right? I was a transportation planning manager, but boy, did I like going over to the Planning and Zoning Commission and having a conversation with them a lot of times on these, and they would just kind of go, "Oh, please, it's not Martine again." But it was because I would bring up conversations and points, say, "Hey, did you think about this? How about those sidewalks? How about this or that?" And trying to actually make those opportunities available through just the lens of a planner. And so from a regional planning standpoint, we want to be able to develop consensus and solutions from a regional standpoint. We just don't want one city to be able to take the lead and leave everybody behind. And so I think you said here in Dallas Metroplex, you had what, 20 counties or something like that? 16 counties? How many cities? 140 cities, right? And so what would happen if only Dallas was the only place that did it, right? Dallas would be a great place, but Dallas wouldn't be able to affect all those, Denton, Carrollton, Mesquite, all those communities that you have down here. What are they doing as well? And so you have to bring everybody around. The one thing I love to do, I don't know if you all have children, but as a father, I've been privileged to be able to coach 3 daughters all the way through, sports and club softball and club soccer and basketball. And the one thing I always noticed, especially now with my last son, is that, the perspective of going to some of these games, right? And then so if you take a look at this bottom part, you have equality, equity, and justice. Everybody in this room should know all 3 of those terms. All 3 of those terms have been developed over the years. And the first thing was, hey, we want equality, right? And so when we thought about equality was we went ahead and we gave everybody a box so that way they can kind of see the game over that fence line, right? But I'm kind of a short guy. So if you just gave me a short box, I wasn't ever going to see that game. No matter that I got the box. It was equal. You gave me the exact same thing. I just couldn't see the game because I'm a short guy. And then we went ahead and we said, okay, well, let's go ahead and do equity. And they gave me 2 boxes. And so now I can see the game, but it's not really fair, right? Because the one guy, he's tall, but he still didn't get his part. And, that's more of the, can we spread, the first part was, can we spread the peanut butter around? The second part was, I was stealing from Peter to pay Paul. And now we're talking about justice, right? And that's the difference in the IIJ, is we're actually talking about justice. You're taking a look there and you're asking yourselves, what can we do to eliminate the barriers that are in front of us, right? And so each community is completely different. There's no one solution, right? I love that map that was up earlier, You know, you went, oh, look at all these charging stations. They're gonna be everywhere. Phase 1, phase 2. And you know what? In that golden triangle, you guys have a ton of charging stations, right? Did anybody notice the one that was proposed in Lubbock County? You probably couldn't, right? It was one dot out in the middle of the sea of blue, nowhere else, right? And you know where that one dot's proposed? Proposed at the, you know, it's proposed off of I-27. It's probably most likely going to be at the Texas DOT yard, right? And so how many of you would love to take a trip up to Lubbock, which is, you know, 4 hours away, right? And then when you get there, the one free IIJ location is at the Texas DOT yard. Right? And so is that equality? Is that equity? Is that justice? Right? And so right now we're talking about justice. And so let's go ahead and we'll move forward. And so when you take a look at it, really, I come in from the perspective and the lens of a planner's view, right? So when I'm going to explain these two maps here. And from a planner's view, I take a look at all my underserved and unprivileged locations, all my Title VI locations, and that's all in the purple area, and it kind of gets a little grayed out there with our MPO boundary there in the yellow. And you can kind of see we're a little spread out there, but for the most part, over half our area falls in that kind of Title VI location in Lubbock. And then if you look really closely and you squint really hard, you can kind of see the charging stations there, you know, the dots there. You have the Tesla station here and a green one there. But for the most majority of it, it happens to only be in the yellow portion of our city, you know, in the southwest portion, the newer portion of the town that had been built. The locations that have the new car dealerships, because for some reason that's where we're putting all these charging stations is over at the car dealerships. And then, you know, you take a look and you kind of go, okay, well, does that help anybody else in those other areas? You know, we have one of the largest universities in Texas. Go Raiders, right? Go Raiders. You know, and you take a look at it and you kind of go, okay, how many of those college students have an EV, right? How many of them can charge? How many can get their vehicle over there on a regular basis to charge if they have to go all the way on the southwest portion of the town? And so you just kind of take a look at it from a planner standpoint. You kind of go, okay, where can I stick these? And then you kind of go, okay, what's preventing those other areas? Are they sensitive lands? And, you know, when I go out to the public, if I were to speak that way, how many of them would really care? How many would have understand, right? Now, if I try to tell this story to my city councilman and I say, hey, come on board. I just told you the whole story. I played this out. How many of them would understand? Right. And so you have to make sure that you frame your story and frame your message in a way that everybody can understand. I used to love taking my little kids to public meetings, you know, and poor things. I mean, oh, my oldest daughter, she's in college right now. And actually I have two. I'm old. I have two in college. But my oldest daughter, when they used to ask her in school, hey, what does your dad do? Right. It was that, you know, bring a parent to school day kind of thing. And then my little girl used to say, oh, you don't want my dad. All he does is just make pretty maps. And that was her ideas. You know, my dad makes pretty maps. And so at that time, I had to learn really quickly, you know, when I describe my story, I need to be able to make sure I describe it in such a way that a 4-year-old can understand all the way up to my politician, right? Anybody who has, you know, just a base understanding all the way up to a very high-end college educational view. And so now you take a look at the public view, right? So they don't really care about some of the externalities. And so you clean up your map and then boom, right there, all of a sudden now you can kind of really see where all those stations are at. The one big issue though is from a perspective when we make the outreach point, when we ask individuals, hey, what's holding you back in West Texas or what's holding you back in Lubbock from actually doing what our government wants you to do, from going out and getting a vehicle, from having a charging station to be able to kind of clean up the air quality. And the first thing that they say is vehicle price is too expensive, right? Well, we already know that, not much I can do about that. And then they kind of say, hey, I can't put a charging station in my house because anywhere in the northeast corner of Lubbock, those homes are historic homes. You know, those are knob and wire wiring, you know, the panel on the outside is about this big. And so in order for them to do that, it's going to be a $4,000 upgrade to their home just to be able to get the right panel. And then, so you kind of go, okay, well, how about locations for implementing the new charging stations? And we kind of go, okay, well, if we put a new charging station, we actually had one on the northeast corner of it. And that charging station's been broke ever since it was put in because no one has a vehicle. And so then everybody kind of just says, oh, this is fun. What can we do with it? And the maintenance isn't all that great. And so now what we're actually taking a look at is trying to kind of maybe say, okay, let's take some of the hurdles. Let's take some opportunities. Anything that's coming in new, let's make sure it's ready. Let's make sure that we have the ordinances in place. But what can we provide for these other individuals? So what kind of barriers can we take? And so we're actually taking a look in West Texas is how do we actually electrify our buses? How do we increase, the frequency there? How can we provide alternative fuel vehicles for them that aren't higher end, that they don't have to actually purchase for themselves? And so we're actually taking a different approach on the Northeast and throughout Texas. We were lucky to receive a grant to be able to electrify all our buses. So we're going to end up with 35 new electric buses in the city, but the problem is now we need a new facility to actually charge them. So we're actually taking a look at, how can we get a facility to charge them? And we're actually trying to, at that point in time, trying to see, hey, since we have to provide an electrification for that, maybe we can provide a charging freight port alongside that one for trucks that come in, right? And so then we provide one of the charging stations on the outside for hopefully in the future to be ready to be able to receive electric freight. And so that's kind of the viewpoint that we're taking in West Texas. Can we conquer all the dragons? Can we slay all the dragons? Can we overcome all the obstacles? Hopefully. But what we're really trying to do at this point in time is trying to get ready so that way we remove some of the obstacles that are going to be in place. So when vehicles come in and by 2030 that are majority just nothing but hybrid and electric, that we are able to accommodate for that and not crush our public infrastructure. The other thing that we're trying to accommodate for is trying to allow for those alternate modes of transportation, but to make those also non-polluting, ozone friendly, type of infrastructure and facility. And so really what we're trying to do is trying to get back to that box, right? It's not really equality. It's not really equity. We're trying to come with justice. We're trying to make it so that way everybody can watch the game and watch it the way that they want to watch it, right? That kid is still cheering for that team, right? The barrier is still there, the fence is there, but he can still see the game, and then the other individuals can see it, above it, below it, but everybody at the opportunity is able to kind of receiving the benefits, of a better environment. So that's kind of what we're doing in West Texas. We're hoping to kind of catch up to the great things that you guys are doing down here south. But again, not every single, thing works in every single place, but hopefully we can do our part to actually help meet the goals here in Texas.
Great, thank you so much. We have one more presentation in this first panel. And so I'm going to introduce now Mukesh Kumar from Waco. Mukesh is the director of the Waco Metropolitan Planning Organization. And prior to joining the Waco MPO in late 2021, he taught city planning for almost 2 decades, and now and then left academia to serve the city of Jackson as director of planning and development to work on planning projects also in several other cities. So yeah, go ahead, thanks.
Thank you for having me here. So one of the first things we have started doing is telling our policy board at this point in time that we'll have a new set of guidance from TxDOT as well as Federal Higher Administration in November. And then we'll come back talking about the NEVI plan again at that point in time. But what it does is that it typically allows the policy board to sort of relax and not feel like we have to produce something immediately. But in the background, that's what I want to talk about. What exactly are we trying to do, and how we plan to address some of these. Now, it's really difficult to add a whole lot more after the 3 presentations that you just saw, but I hope that there are a few things that we can add to this. So very quickly, the standard consents that with NEVI plan that Quite a bit of it we've already discussed. You can see that inventory and baseline, especially for smaller areas, is a problem because even though we have a Tesla charging station, but we don't really have good data on how many vehicles are charging at what rate, how long do they spend, how much time do they spend, and if there are variations across the weekday. And so that baseline data is going to be crucially important for us. So we have gotten in touch with the, in our case, it's the Collins Street Bakery that has a Tesla charging station. And so they are, they have promised to get us some information. And actually, we hope to install some video cameras to actually directly go ahead and collect some of the primary data. The other challenge related to that, regarding inventory and baseline data, is that one of the DC charging, fast charging locations in Waco area is actually at a Ford dealership. In our conversation with them, what turned out that first, it took them a lot longer to actually install than what they had initially proposed. So there was almost a 50% increase in the time that it took them to become fully operational. There was also a major cost differential. So the amount of money that they were expecting in the beginning was significantly different, but not so much because what the industry standards are, but since it is a Ford dealership, they are required to install charging stations according to Ford specifications. And Ford typically has a different standard than most of the other ones. And so those are the inventory and baseline data that we have started collecting, and hopefully we'll have some of them to provide input into when we actually start discussing a regional plan. Regarding equity concerns, so we have the equity concern related to charging station is not only it's not new, we have discussed it a lot. And in most cases, that's one of the first questions we ask, that in our planning process for EV charging stations, we might actually entrench some of the systemic biases against disadvantaged communities. So in order to deal with that, one of the approaches that we are considering at the moment is to try to understand that whenever there is a transition to clean energy system, there are winners and losers. And we have to be able to identify and be able to frame the equity argument from that perspective, rather than simply trying to figure out how many charging stations are located where. Which is typically the response we come up with. Low-income communities and multi-occupant dwellings, that concern is of course there. And we have started looking, also evaluating the kind of regulations we need, the ordinances, the sample ordinances we could cut and take from other areas, advise the municipalities to give them so that they are prepared for that. Related to multi-occupant dwelling, though, I should also point out that there is a concern that typically these apartment complexes tend to have a life cycle of certain period. And it really needs to be understood that the life cycle of a charging station is going to be probably different from the building itself. And so that kind of coordination between what the regulations are and what the quality of charging stations we're expecting is going to make a difference. We are also very curiously and with great enthusiasm actually looking at Denver's incentive program, because one of the ways that we think we can address this issue is, so the biggest challenge, equity challenge related to charging infrastructure is, of course, the access to car itself. And so what we also understand that in Texas, weather is not necessarily as uncooperative for e-bikes and such. And so Denver's program has, I believe that they have been able to deliver on roughly about 5,000 rebates. And the programs that they have are at $300 for everyone, $1,200 for income challenged communities, and $1,400 for e-adapted bikes, which is another interesting way of dealing with accessible mobility in their area. So we are very intently looking at it and trying to figure out is there something that we can advise not only City of Waco, but some of the smaller communities as well. Zoning and land use concerns are obviously quite important because we have not done a parking inventory, but I'm pretty sure that within Waco region in McLennan County, we are pretty much drowning in surface parking lots, just like almost every other city. So the concern there is that can we, in fact, try to figure out smart parking, include smart parking decisions with the EV charging planning process, and ensuring that all the zoning and land use concerns related to that are in fact taken care of before October rolls around. And then the last current standard problem that MPOs face is how do you include it as part of your MTP process itself? Because quite often MTP process has these guidelines. We typically address them, but right now there is not a lot of agreement about how do we take the charging infrastructure itself and include that as part of our concern for climate and energy efficiency. Here are some of the new concerns this is what I wanted to point out, that we feel it's unique to us, but I'm pretty sure it's not. In fact, most of these are something that you all have been thinking about quite a bit too. But this is where I think the local municipalities will have to take the lead and decide, how will these problems play out. So first one is that the cost of charging equipment and rate of adoption, both of these two things are going to differ from area to area. So for instance, when the numbers come through, I think Lori had some numbers about the total number of EV vehicles throughout Texas. Well, that percentage does not represent Waco. In Waco, that percentage is actually significantly lower. So rate of adoption is going to be fundamentally different for Waco as compared to Dallas or Austin or Houston. And so we not only need to be aware of it, but we need to be aware of it because the desirability of a location for EV charging station and the capacity to deliver at exactly that location, they don't exist in the same time and space. And so what it means is that some areas which are most desirable locations might not have any private sector entity that has the capacity to apply for the program and actually install and operate and maintain it. And so that particular gap, spatial gap, and we're not even talking 50-mile gap. These are the 2-mile gap between where the ideal location is and where we have the capacity to deliver them. And that planning process then becomes really important. Next one is really important because the mid-transition mid-transition period, which is basically instead of thinking only about the charging stations, we are trying to think about, we actually have to make the transition from a stable fossil fuel-based energy system to a stable alternative energy-based system. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. That's not going to happen because we have 20 charging stations or 500,000 charging stations. That's going to take a while. And this is also sort of fairly standard stock and flow problem that electric vehicles are getting produced and people will buy them. Actually, the rates of purchase of electric vehicle, even in the United States, is growing a lot faster. We still have some ways to go with the rate of adoption in China and Norway, for instance, or even Germany. But it is growing up. But what this still means is that for the next 10 to 15 years, Texas will still have trucks, and not all of those trucks are going to be Ford Lightning trucks either. And so the point is that for the next 10 years, it's not going to be all electric charging stations, electric vehicle charging stations. It's actually going to be a combination of gas stations and charging stations. And how do we make that transition without disrupting the economic flow and freight and so on in a careful way? The next concern, which again is unique among cities, we have been quite fortunate actually in Waco that we have all the municipalities within McLennan County, which is our planning area. We have a wonderful working relationship with all of them. And so anytime we need to have a conversation with them, we can, and that's a really positive way, but I assume that is not necessarily the case at all places. Quite often there is competition and there's discussion that, oh, how can you get EV charging station? Why don't I get it? And so we have been lucky, but this is something that we can't really take for granted either. And so it needs to be part of the planning process. And then, of course, we're looking at the regulations related to e-bikes, moped scooters, and adaptive e-bikes, because throughout the world, the total number of new electric vehicles that are sold, almost 80% of them are actually e-bikes. They're not true electric cars. And so in some ways, we also need to start thinking about these concerns. Last thing I want to leave you with, this is a particular chart that we came across that we got really excited about, that in our discussion for the mid-transition framework, whereby we want to shift from a stable fossil fuel based energy system to stable alternative energy, clean energy based system. How do we actually do this? And so, of course, the top part is what you can identify very quickly, that's largely based on technology substitution. We just want to electrify a lot of these. Then, if we get better at that, then we start managing the system far better. And then we start thinking about structural reforms in terms of zoning and land use regulations and so on. But what we really could be aspiring for is a transformational transformation of the communities themselves, so that the access to jobs and such, whether it is through cars or whether it is through e-bikes and such, become real possibility. And so I'm happy to discuss any of these more, but thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And I'm now actually going to ask my colleague Edgar to move and have the panel sit right here so that we can do some Q&A. We're just going to go open. So if, yeah, Ryan, Laurie, Mukesh, and Martine, if you can come, we lost. All right, great. Up to you. And so just as a reminder, please, if you have a question, I guess we'll just go ahead, do hand raises, and Harshit, feel free to cut me off if there's some good online questions. And just as a reminder, please make sure you turn on your microphone or walk to the mic in the back so that our online participants can hear your question. No questions. All right, Randy.
The question's pretty much to everybody, but Lori, you brought up that the final rulemaking gives level 2 opportunities, et cetera. It also says that for the non-AFC locations, the 4 times 150 for the DC fast charger stations is also completely open and negotiable. I think they still say any particular station has to have 4 ports of some combination. And how would that change your thinking about a mix of level 2 versus other local MPO, et cetera, charging?
So first of all, you've gotten more into the final guidance than I have, because I hadn't gotten that far. It's a good question. I know y'all have cited interest in like the help me, single phase DC fast charge. Is that the appropriate?
That's annex, certainly a very low power DC
Right,
fast charge. So
right.
single phase, they're easy to put in,
Right.
20 kW,
So, like,
something like that. But even
what's
if it's just one 100 kW
Right.
station at a quarter of the cost of what these other things are.
Exactly. And that's, we don't know the answer. We don't know what the human behavior is going to be around charging, 5 years from now, when we know the private sector is continuing to invest in additional charging stations at dealerships, at traditional fueling stations, things like that. What is that need for public charging look like? When we're talking about serving multifamily residents, there's a push for workplaces to install charging. So if that's successful, then it changes maybe the need elsewhere. We just had a meeting internally yesterday on scenario planning. And so that's one of the things that we're thinking about is we probably need to think through and articulate a variety of scenarios and what are the trade-offs, what are the costs, what are the benefits of each one before we get too far down the road. Good thing for us is before we actually, I'm hoping, I don't know, before we need to deliver something to TxDOT in terms of our phase 2 planning, we'll at least have another year and a half of real world implementation to learn from. So that's a really long way of saying, I have no idea.
Any other perspectives on that before we move on to the next question?
I guess the perspective I bring is that it's true. We're going to have to not just rely on the public entities to actually put these charging stations in, but to actually start encouraging workplace individuals to actually put them in, especially when you consider the amount of time it takes to charge on a single phase. So what you were talking about, those single phases charging stations are really cheap. They're easy to install. Well, sorry, I take it back. Not really cheap. They're actually cost effective in the sense of the amount of money that you have to actually put in. And then from an actual charging dime standpoint, it's actually even all not that cost prohibitive from an employer to actually put it in to encourage their employees to charge as a work incentive at their location. The reason why they're actually more effective, in my opinion, is is the amount of time it actually takes to actually charge a vehicle off of a phase one. You're talking about hours. And so when you're talking about hours, it's not meant for those individuals who are traveling, across your community or through your community, multi-state travel, because they're not going to sit there for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours waiting for their vehicle to get charged. And so from that aspect, from electrifying your community, those are the opportunities that actually make sense from actually bringing that throughout and electrifying your community. As far as trying to make sure that to meet the aspect of interstate or intercommunity travel, those are going to have to be phase 2 or phase 3 chargers. Those locations have to actually be in places that make sense, in my opinion. And the reason why I say it makes sense is they have to be in a place that is easy to find, but a place that individuals are going to want to stop and actually sit down for a little bit. Because even on a phase 2 charging, you go from being an 8-hour charge for a full vehicle charge down to 2 hours. And so really, are you going to sit at a truck stop or are you going to sit at the DOT, facility for 2 hours? You really aren't. And so what you want to do is make sure that it's in a location that they have something else to do. And so, it could be anything with working with a public-private partnership at a movie theater, that's next to the interstate, and you say, hey, let's put one in, you maintain it. And all of a sudden now they get to go watch a movie for 2 hours while their car charges, right? Something that makes sense. It doesn't have to be a movie theater. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas in that aspect, but you have to really be understanding of the barriers that are there, but also kind of think of it from the public standpoint of how is it going to be utilized?
Great. Yeah.
I like very much your comments earlier about justice and trying to ensure that we really have, as equal an opportunity to own vehicles and also be able to charge them in your communities. And wanted to know, what are your thoughts on partnering with these private businesses? My company, Davico, all of our customers are the large retail, restaurant, hospitality, and healthcare. They're all thinking, particularly if they're publicly traded, think McDonald's, Starbucks, CVS, Walgreens. And then if you want to go into, say, areas that are more economically challenged, you might be thinking TJ Maxx or Ross stores or Dollar General, where there is going to be some dwell time, and they want the customers in the store for as long as possible. And so you can put they're thinking about putting chargers there. They want to be part of this. And so really my question is there thoughts towards those private public partnerships, and how do those companies access some of these funds to augment the capital that they would put into?
We might also have more on that in our next speaker, who's also going to be talking about some additional, but Ryan, go for it for now.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good question. There's a lot to be worked out still, but the private entities will be owning the charging infrastructure. TxDOT will not. We definitely will not be having any at our locations. So we're going to be working with them to find a place, where we would really like to have, I think that in the planning, the study areas that we put up for the first couple of phases, we found that about 68 to 66% of them were in disadvantaged areas, which we were glad to see, because there's a Justice 40 component to the NEVI program, where you have to have 40% of the benefits going to disadvantaged communities. So we feel like we have exceeded that. In a lot of the places along the alternative fuel corridors and interstates, are in areas that are in disadvantaged communities. And, when it comes to, within the boundaries of, the metropolitan planning organizations, we'll definitely be working closely, with our partners, because we've talked to some MPOs and, that some of their goals are different. Some of them really, would like to see, high usage, and so, those ones tend to be interested in putting them in areas where they're guaranteed to have a lot of usage. Some of the other ones are interested in driving adoption and are more interested in putting them in areas where there actually aren't that many. So we really want to support that. And part of the way that we're doing that is we're bringing on a program manager, hopefully this March, but possibly later in the year. And we're going to be using that to, to really help support, the rural counties and the metropolitan planning organizations, and really, try to give them, the kind of tools and assets and, resources that they'll need to, find out, the best place that they can put them within their own boundaries. And like I mentioned earlier, although they've been planned out, generally speaking, along the interstates, the ones inside within the boundaries of the metropolitan planning organizations, still have not been planned out at this time.
All right, we're going to go to an online question and then we'll come
Yes.
back to the room.
There is one online question. So how do MPOs think about EV charging emergency response plans, thinking about hurricanes, wildfire evacuation, blackouts, etc., where EV drivers need working charging stations on the run? So how do MPOs think about EV charging in emergency response plan? And thinking about hurricanes or blackouts when EV drivers need working charging stations on the run on the evacuation routes.
We're actually doing, we're going to be doing an update to our long range plan, our safety plan. All 4 major documents from this coming cycle. So we're actually trying to take a look at that aspect as well as the equity aspect. One of the big things that we're trying to touch base with is really how do you effectively provide those benefits in a way that everybody can access them. And so right now we don't have a good answer for that because we actually haven't done that update to our safety plan, but we will be trying to incorporate all that aspect into it, as well as trying to make sure that we coordinate with the current safety plan that's been adopted through Lubbock County and the safety corridor planning, that has occurred here recent. But one of the big aspect on there is really just trying to make sure that you meet the spacing correctly. And when I say spacing, you have to understand, most of the ranges of these vehicles that are being produced have a limitation. If they truly have 100% charge and they truly meet the full range, you're still only talking about 200 miles at most, unless you're on the high end vehicle. And those are very limited in the sense of the sales. And so your spacing really has to meet that federal guidance in the sense of trying to make sure that you're within 150 miles and that you have them spread out in such a way that you're just not going to create a log jam. Unfortunately, though, as you've seen with most traditional vehicles, those log jams occur no matter what. And so at that point in time, then you have to have other safety plans in place. And so, those other safety plans may include having electric buses to be able to help, bus individuals out more efficiently instead of using gas buses, if you're really truly trying to be electric, or just doing hybrid vehicle, busing and hybrid buses. And so it's going to be a challenge. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that.
I just want to add that the part of the comprehensive safety action plan, this particular question about how do we incorporate EV usage and the charging station as part of the safety under emergency or any kind of disaster is very much on our radar. But we don't have a perfect answer at this point in time, because when the federal government started this SS4A planning process, EV charging stations were not necessarily very high on the radar at the moment. But this question has come up quite a bit, and we are, and this will be included as part of our safety action plan.
I'm not with an MPO, but I did want to add that, in our NEVI plan, we did add 50% more ports, to our chargers if they were on an evacuation route. And, and as far as, resiliency goes, our transportation planning and programming division is in the middle of doing our first resiliency plan right now. So hopefully that can kind of inform, some of the discussion around that. But I know that, one thing that we've run into is, trying to make, the chargers resilient, is usually about, kind of, building them up, making them kind of armored and, so that, especially with flooding, you definitely don't want to get, tons of water near your charger. But one of the things that, is going to have to, worked out little by little is, some of the ADA recommendations usually have kind of the opposite effect, where it's building down, keeping everything flat, no barriers. So, I think that that'll be one of the themes that comes up in all this build out that, all of us in the room will have to, figure out little by little and find out, what that, what a good compromise is between those two items.
So just a couple of things I would add. One is I do think it's very important to think about siting chargers at locations that have some resiliency, whether it's a facility that has some sort of grid redundancy, backup power. If it's a charging station site that itself is designed with backup power or microgrid or on-site generation or whatever bells and whistles can be added to it to harden it, especially along evacuation routes. I think there's also a messaging piece. If you, in the event a storm is coming, it's just as important to fully charge your car as it is to fill up the gas tank. I also think there could be conversations around, mobility assistance patrol. You run out of fuel on the freeway and somebody comes and can give you a quarter gallon of gas. Can we not also give an emergency charge for those types of situations? The last thing I would say is there's money out there for that. The Joint Office of Transportation and Energy put out a notice of intent last Wednesday as part of a flurry of announcements that came out last Wednesday. So if you go to driveelectric.gov and you look at some of the news announcements that are posted, there's a notice of intent for what's called a ride and drive, I think is the name of the funding opportunity, but topic area 1 is on resilient EV infrastructure planning. It would be great to have some of that funding come to Texas.
And I'm just going to quickly overstep my moderating role right now. I was working with NOAA before I came to Texas A&M, and I would recommend people interested in that to also go look over at the social science program at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, where they are very concerned about thinking about evacuations and changing the human behavior. So I think that goes back to, Martine's image of if when we find justice in the end, it's taking away that barrier, which is the fence that people can't see over. If our problem is evacuations not being able to get people the resources they need to be able to evacuate quickly and closely, then how do we maybe think about changing the human behavior on that side? And so for those of you interested, I think WP, the Weather Program Office, also has money going towards some of these efforts. So if you're interested in that, I'd say, think about the interdisciplinary approach there as well. All right, next question. All right, we're going to go all the way to the back in the checkered shirt. Yep.
Hi, thank you. I had a couple of quick questions, but I know we're kind of running late on time. So if I can't get to them or you guys can't get to them, then I can follow up with you later. But 2 quick questions for TxDOT. In regards to the landing page, when you first said that you guys are going to keep that open for that interactive tool, would you recommend that we still share and ask people to use that throughout the multi-year phases of this project? And then a second part to that question, sorry, is I know that you said for next steps, you're planning to coordinate with FHWA, but we already have some of our local planning partners asking about the first year. Would we hear from you at your NEVI team or from our local district office about the phasing out or the first phase, so to speak, in our areas?
To answer the first question, yeah, I would definitely encourage them to use our social pinpoint engagement site. It's, I mean, in some areas, it looks like actually the comments are getting kind of crowded. But I would, that's going to be up there, for, for the duration of the program. And we're definitely going to be, using that to inform a lot of the discussions, especially when we get into a lot of those areas that are, denser, more populated, more metropolitan. And, right now, and we've been meaning to reach out to our MPO partners. We at first, we really say, okay, December, we're going to have a bunch of regional meetings. That did not pan out. We wanted to do it earlier in the year, but that hasn't panned out so far. And I guess on one side, it probably will be, honestly, several years before we get to that stage. But yeah, we understand that, there's a lot of interest from the locals. There's a lot of interest from the MPOs themselves. And we definitely, want to, be more in contact now, we're hoping that, maybe this summer or later in the spring, to be, having some regional meetings, but, I'm knocking on wood and, crossing my fingers, because every time I say something like that, yeah, it doesn't happen. But we really do want to, reach out though, because, we understand that, there can be a lot of misunderstanding about, what the program is and does. And we want to be a resource, but also there's only 2 of us working on it. In a lot of other states, they have an army of consultants, and they've got entire teams devoted to it. It's just me and another guy. But we definitely will be reaching out though, and anybody who wants to have a conversation, email me. I've got this many cards today, so definitely let me know if you have a conversation, either today or coming up. I'm happy to have it.
One of the things I would encourage also is for MPOs to reach out to the other MPOs and to reach out through Tempo. And to be able to kind of understand that we're all in the same boat. But we are actually mandated, much like Texas, to lead out. And so we can't just sit back and wait for Texas to do it. They do a great job at Texas DOT. You guys have a huge, massive land to cover. And so, my heart goes out to, 2 people trying to do the size of Texas. Good luck. But from besides that, we have a bunch of cogs. And work with your roll cogs. So we have a good partnership with SPAG over at the LMPO. We're working with them to actually try to do some of this coordination and trying to make sure that we're reaching out to our rural communities just as much as we're going to try to reach out to our neighboring MPOs. We have Amarillo, Odessa, Midland. We have all these other MPOs that are surrounding us. And we're going to try to make sure that we reach out to them as well to make sure that we're trying to coordinate with our efforts. And so now that I've kind of heard some of the good messaging from down here in Dallas Fort Worth, I'm going to be reaching out here as well to kind of get some best practices as well and kind of just understand what are some of the issues that they're seeing, since we're kind of that weird duck. We're not quite as big as some of the larger MPOs, but we're not quite as small as some of the smaller ones. And so we want to kind of have some lessons learned as well, so we don't make any mistakes that we can avoid.
Great, next question. Here.
I know this is more about the electric vehicle infrastructure research, but just, I'm curious about, have there been any consideration for a pavement electrification and like a green lane? So versus installation of chargers?
Yes.
Lori.
Yes. So yes, our MPO is looking at opportunities, and there are a couple potential projects on the table where we're interested in demonstrating inductive charging in conjunction with some other things, not necessarily, I don't know that it would be on a public roadway. I don't know that it would be on a TxDOT roadway at this point. But looking at some facilities where we could evaluate that. There are some research consortiums that are working on that. We're aware of those. I think we've connected some of our local partners to some of those. So definitely interested in how we can apply it. I think there's just a lot of questions about, at least in Texas right now, about putting it on public streets, public lands.
Okay, thank you.
And we, we actually had a company from, I think, Israel called Electrion that we brought out to the Western Association of State Highway Transportation Officials back in June, actually up here in Dallas. And they gave a great presentation of, what they do and how they do it. For the NEVI program, it probably isn't, is demonstrable and cost effective at this point, but there's been a lot of good research done that shows that inductive charging can really be a good thing, especially for in an area let's say where a bus has a certain route along major roads, that can it really have a good return on investment. So I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of interest in that area, especially in the metropolitan areas. But yeah, Lori's right. As far as me getting into an EV and driving to El Paso along I-10 on inductive charging, that probably isn't in the cards anytime soon. But yeah, I think that we're going to see a lot of movement in that, in research and developments and pilots, all kinds of things over the next few years.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, we're going to go to the standing mic now, sir.
Thank you. Can anyone speak to planning for maintenance of the charging units moving forward into the future, and if there are funding opportunities for that?
Well, the way they structured the federal program, which was very smart, was that they included 5 years of operations and maintenance. And the way that we're going to do it with the NEVI program is to try to make sure that we spread the peanut butter as much as we can. As soon as a location has a couple months where it's self-sufficient, where we've kind of defined it as a certain number of charging events, we're going to take away those maintenance and operations funds so that we can put them in some of the other areas, especially in some of maybe the rural areas where there may not be as an immediate of a return on investment in those areas. So I don't know if you were talking about, referring specifically about funding, but because these chargers will be owned by private companies, they'll they have all the perks and all the benefits, but all the responsibilities as well to take care of their charging equipment, make sure that its uptime is 97% or more. And so companies are looking at doing that in different ways, but they do have to be per the federal guidelines, they have to be attached to remote access to internet. So it can be it can be monitored remotely, but there's only so many sensors you can put on so many things, and it will probably require people to actually go out and inspect the equipment and make sure that everything is functioning, especially along some of these that the highways. I mean, I go to El Paso all the time in some of those areas. I don't think that most of the locations will probably be at already developed spaces, but some of them possibly could be in pretty far away from from population areas. So, it may be, a challenge for some of those companies to get out there and do maintenance and inspections, but that will be part of the contract, that we would put out. And that will be, one of the things that, that the providers will be on the hook for is for maintenance and operations.
And just a quick reminder on that, also the J in IIJA stands for jobs. And so there is also a focus for those who are worried about maintenance on the training that goes along with the needed electricians for all of these. And if you're interested in that, our research team can definitely point you towards more resources on the workforce development elements. Next question. Here.
Is it on? Okay. Wanted to kind of get more information about what is TxDOT's goal or kind of like plan in terms of implementation or timeline for the alternative fuel corridors, charging stations. I think you mentioned during the presentation that this is the phase one, and this is kind of maybe a little bit more near term compared to other like other type of things that you have shown. So I wanted to just get a little bit more understanding of that.
Yeah, and that, I think that the last time I gave this presentation, the last workshop, I had seasons. It was, winter, this was going to happen, and spring, this is going to happen, and summer, that might happen. So, any time that anybody's talking in terms of seasons, that, it's probably subject to change. But, we're really hoping to, get our request for grant applications, out is, hopefully as soon as possible. We're still, digesting, the final rules that just came out last week, and, working with our federal partners to, to make that work. But, so it's hard to tell how long, having worked on some TxDOT procurements in the past, they can take a while sometimes. So, we're hoping to have, that out soon, but, it's, there's a lot up in the air right now that we're working through. So, we're trying to, get through that as quickly as we can. But, on our webpage, we do have a, something where you can sign up for updates. We haven't had many updates lately because we've been kind of in a holding pattern for those federal rules. But as soon as we know that anything is going to be going up on the website with those requests for grant applications, we spam everybody on our list and let them know that that's coming out. And that's the main way that we keep in touch with everybody. So so I'm happy to give you my card. And but signing up for those updates, usually that's the easiest way to make sure that you're in the know and that you're not missing anything.
If I can follow up a little bit on I know there's a lot of corridors statewide. So is there any guidance documents like how you guys will be prioritizing kind of like prioritization of those corridors, I guess?
Yeah, well, I mean, with phase one is easy. I mean, every 50 50 miles is, I mean, a kid with a marker and a map can pretty much do that. So, that's not, the difficult part. But the difficult part, is that, in some of those areas, like I mentioned, can be, in areas where there's not much out there, especially along, I-20 and I-10 in West Texas. So, it's, we've got about 56 locations along the alternative fuel corridors. And based on what we heard from stakeholders was, they would tell us like, hey, listen, we don't need you to tell us it needs to be on the street corner, but we got to have a rough idea where to put this thing. So that's why we came up with our study areas, which are these, blue circles along the interstates. They kind of give you a 2-mile radius of, where it should probably go. And so that gives, that kind of tries to give a balance between, structure and meeting the federal requirements, but also giving enough, freedom to the developer to kind of, put them where it might make the most sense based off of, people's dwell time, the business type, the power available in that area. And so that's kind of where things are right now, at least.
Okay, thank you.
All right, yes, sir, blue shirt.
Thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions. The first one I jotted down is building codes. We've been begging for 25 years for building code adaptation to make the new construction EV ready. And when I say new construction, I'm not just talking about residential. One of our biggest nightmares right now is we do a lot of multifamily, and I'm talking places that are brand spanking new, and getting the electric in there is a nightmare. Any thoughts out there on, working at the local levels, the MPOs, to adapt building codes that make at least going from this point forward a little more user friendly towards EV adaptation? That's one question.
Let's start with that one.
Okay, we'll start with that one. Thank you.
So yes, there's some talk about that. One of the good things about being housed in the COG is one of our other departments, Environment and Development, coordinates a group called the Regional Codes Coordinating Committee. So for more than 30 years, they've coordinated code revisions at the local level, or code amendments at the local level that get adopted by our COGS executive board. We've talked about EV readiness. There are a handful of cities that are currently in process of doing some sort of EV ready something. City of Louisville just finalized their unified development code that includes some EV ready elements for commercial, not necessarily multifamily. We've got some other cities that are different places doing different things. So there should be some completion to all of that by the end of the spring. And then at the regional level, we're looking to take all of those pieces, put them together, cross-reference them with the International Construction Code, came out with some model language a year or two ago that didn't get adopted at the national level, and see if we can't put together some sort of regional recommendation package. So it's definitely on the radar.
Thank you. The other question or statement was, we mentioned buses, but it's also with large DC chargers at a site. We're doing some right now. We've been doing this for a long time, but where we incorporate renewable energy. We got a couple of them up on I-40 that we're doing, that we're going up to 250 kW ground mounted solar at a site. But the big thing with us, or that should be a focus around here, is incorporating renewable and stored energy to utilize off-peak capacity from the night during the peak demand hours to try to smooth out the hills and valleys of that load. Is there any thought along those lines? Is anybody working along those lines where they're, especially we're looking at all these school buses right now. It's just frightening how many school districts are getting electric buses. And, it's just a big load out there. And it's like, well, that's a perfect place for renewable energy at the bus yard. Any thoughts on that?
So I'm happy to share that, a lot of the diesel buses that school systems tend to use, we actually have a research program at Baylor where we're trying to figure out how could we retrofit these diesel engines with either solar powered or battery powered vehicles. Along with that, we are one of the things that is working well in Waco is that we have a lot of actors who are responsible for fleets, that they are actively taking stock of what the fleet conditions are. Because many times it does not make sense. If you bought a diesel vehicle 2 years ago, it's hard to think of the let's discard it for an EV vehicle. And those buses are pretty expensive. And also in terms of infrastructure, and that's what we keep thinking about the mid-state transition, that these large number of vehicles, they're going to remain in the stock. So we just need to figure out a systematic way of phasing them out so that it does not cause unnecessary pain. One of the related concern that we have, which again might be peculiar to several other areas too. So TSTC, the Texas State Technical College, has a really good automotive engineering program. And they have been able to work very closely with the fleets that exist within Waco area to maintain these vehicles. And the result is that most of the public transportation as well as school buses are in really good condition. And so now the discussion is also with TSTC that how do you revamp their automotive engineering program so that all the necessary workforce we need to maintain some of these are also equally available for us. So that's sort of largely how we are thinking. So there's the academic component at Baylor where they're they're experimenting with these diesel buses. How can we retrofit them? But at the same time, we're also thinking about the entire system, about how do we create more sustainable, less painful process of transition.
Kind of in my prior life, one of the things I really learned was that battery storage or storage of solar and renewable energies, I guess in North Texas, where we're at, it would be a lot of wind energy, and the storage of that energy that comes through is really thirst heavy, in the sense of you need a lot of water to be able to maintain the coolness of those batteries, make sure that those batteries are operated to be able to store that energy over a long period of time. And so really, when I was in my prior life working out in Arizona, what we ended up doing was we were reaching out to our energy providers, so APS, Waycock, the nuclear power plants and things like that. And what we were doing was we were offering them better zoning opportunities to be able to then have them come in and implement the larger battery capacity storage facilities. And so it really comes back down to working with your electric providers and be able to provide zoning opportunities for them to be able to come in near the storage producing locations, to be able to then produce the battery capacity that they need to be able to store those or to bank the power. So that way you can even out those power usage, those peaks and valleys, and then make it a little bit more even. However, I would say the biggest obstacle a lot of times is to be able to have sufficient water to be able to cool down those battery packs.
Must be different batteries than we use. We don't have that problem.
All right, we're gonna go to one more question before we have break.
Go on.
All right, sure.
Is there gonna be any scope or any analysis done on the disposal of these batteries and how that at end of life, as far as the batteries and the infrastructure of that stuff? Is that gonna be looked at through all this scope and analysis in these projects?
So Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is doing a study right now. It came out of the last legislative session to a certain degree on battery storage, recycling, end of life. Philip, do you happen to remember when it's going to be done? Okay.
TCQ is working on that right now, and I know there's a discussion of the legislature on funding some of that work. It's in a couple bills that are in movement right now. One of them we think will be going along, but it's definitely an ongoing conversation. I think something people are trying to be very intentional about.
And I'll just add, Department of Energy is also investing a lot of R&D dollars that came out of the infrastructure law on that topic.
All right, great. Let's all thank our panelists and speakers. Thank you guys so much. And so we're going to take a 17-minute break and come back at 11:15 for our next speaker.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like it's there. So I probably, since it's only you, I'll introduce you up here. You can speak from up here and maybe you can sit that somewhat. So there's a spot next to Allison. So maybe okay, for your notes and stuff, or okay. Okay.
And then like advancing, it's just the space.
Yeah, just the
Okay, perfect.
working, yep. So I will just get some water and be back.
All right, thank you. I am far. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
In person.
So glad you're here and give us your perspective on the multifamily aspect.
Would be great.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be a little different. I think there was supposed to be parade and other speakers,
Yes.
but I think the weather probably and the date change probably changed a lot of that. So
It didn't really help us, so. That's why I so appreciative that you were able to make it. Give us this, because it's going to be very important. We have to talk about it as much as we want to. We've talked about energy supply, the grid, the resiliency.
right.
We haven't really gotten into most of that aspect. It seems like people we talk to, they either didn't have much to talk about it yet, or they weren't willing to share. So I was trying to figure out which
Right.
which it is, but.
I think it is a big deal in Dallas. We just have high percentage of our residents multifamily, like 58%. So just so much opportunity in that space that we had to address it.
Yeah, so.
Great.
Again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Well, that's the thing, we have 6 months before it comes to their face. So, well, say you are you from BB's here's the thing. Yeah. Open our. Yes, okay. There's no.
That we did get such a good. I don't know.
Okay, everyone, we can get started as soon as everyone's seated. Okay, good morning, everyone. We're ready to get started again. We are ready to start, yes, once everyone is. No, that's fine, you know. I know everyone has a lot to discuss, and hopefully with the lunch afterwards, you will also have time to network. So my name is Tara Ramani. I am one of the research team members from TTI working on this project. So up next, we have a presentation from the city of Dallas on a very important topic. And you know, in our previous panel, we did have quite a few mentions of equity, about making sure that charging availability and access is just, and topics like that. So I think this presentation, it teed it up very really well for this presentation on multifamily electric vehicle charging initiatives. So I'm very happy to introduce our speaker for this session. Far Andrews is the Senior Climate Coordinator for the City of Dallas, where she is primarily leading the city's first comprehensive climate action plan. She has previously been an environmental outreach manager for the city of Richardson, as well as an air quality manager for the city of Austin. She has over 20 years of experience working on a variety of environmental and sustainability issues, and has rightly earned sort of the reputation as being an eco champion. She's worked on climate planning, state and local policy and rulemaking, communication of complex information, and management of climate protection, air quality, pollution prevention, water conservation, and land development program. So in Austin, she also chaired the Clean Air Coalition Advisory Committee, and she helped develop and implement regional air quality improvement plans. She was also a founding member of the city's climate protection team and played a vital role in multiple climate planning initiatives. And before serving in the city of Austin, she was also with TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So welcome, Fard. We're very happy to have you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was the long bio. Good morning, everyone. I'm the Senior Climate Coordinator for the City of Dallas, and I have the distinction of being the last presentation before lunch. So I do understand how important it is to be concise, and I'm going to do my best here. So first, I'd like to thank TTI for the opportunity to discuss the City of Dallas's multifamily EV charging initiative. And today, what I really have planned is I want to introduce you to our efforts, kind of talk about what our motivation is, how we're taking a real data-driven approach to this issue, how we're focusing on equity and keeping that really top of mind, like front and center, then talk about some of our outcomes and next steps. So how did this effort start? In 2020, the City of Dallas unanimously passed its first CCAP plan. And CCAP really is our comprehensive environmental and climate action plan. It's a mouthful, but really what it is, it's our blueprint for how the city plans to address environmental concerns moving forward. There are 8 different goals in the city CCAP plan. And this initiative most closely aligns with goal number 3, which is Dallas's communities have access to sustainable, affordable transportation. There's a target under this goal of installing 1,500 publicly accessible EV charging stations in the city. So that's our, at the top of our motivation. And during the development of our CCAP plan, equity was a real high priority. It's just a real high priority for the city of Dallas in general. And in the transportation sector, a lot of our preliminary data showed that we still had a lot of work to do, especially in the southern sector. In year one of implementation of our CCAP plan, we just kind of dived right into the transportation sector because, of course, that's one of the largest sources of our greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the smartest things we did was partner with our Clean Cities team here at the North Central Texas Council of Government, Lori Clark and team. Thank you, guys. We work with them to do an analysis on our infrastructure in the city of Dallas. And with the help of the Clean Cities team, we were able to identify gaps in our network, look at opportunities, really unpack some of the common challenges, and get really, really granular into the data. The study data really helped us build these initiatives so that we had a maximum impact in this multifamily area. So a few goals of this analysis. We wanted to look at where residents were in proximity to public charging. We wanted to, of course, identify gaps and look at opportunities for a more equitable distribution of electric vehicle charging stations. And we wanted to align with funding opportunities. That was another one of our goals. So the next few slides are going to be a bit data heavy, lots of pretty colors, but I wanted to make sure I put them in because I kind of want to walk you through the methodology we used in this approach. The executive team at the City of Dallas really responds to data-driven solutions. So we were really heavy on the data side. The first thing we did was we took a look at where are all of our EV owners in correlation with public charging stations. And you'll see on this chart, the darker red corresponds with high EV ownership. And then there are different color dots depending on the type of public charging infrastructure available. Then we added the EJ layer to this analysis. And what we saw was, relatively fewer EV charging stations in our environmental justice areas. So according to the Department of Energy, EV drivers do the majority of their charging, like 80% of their charging at home. And the city of Dallas, just looking at our makeup and our demographic, over 50% of our residents live in a multifamily scenario. And this gave us a lot of opportunity in that multifamily space to help with the EV transition. As we know, the lack of charging infrastructure is one of the top barriers to EV ownership. So we really started to hone in on this opportunity. So what we did then is we looked at our multifamily residents in correlation with public charging. So some of the highest correlation we expected to see in our CBD, and that's kind of what it revealed. So you see the darker spots are multiple multifamily units. And then, of course, the colored dots correspond with different levels of public charging infrastructure. Then we got more granular. Then we looked at EV ownership in multifamily with close proximity to public charging. So basically, where are the owners of EVs that live in multifamily, and how close are they to public charging? Like within half a mile was the distance we used. And in the CBD, it was about 46%. So not too bad. And then we looked at the same scenario with the EV layer on, and the numbers significantly changed. Well over half without access within half a mile, like 67%. So this is the most compelling slide in the analysis to me. This slide really highlights the gaps in our network for multifamily. So what you can see from, I guess, the brownish color areas, those block groups they represent areas where there is multifamily properties that have no access to plugs. So after pulling all that data together, we wanted to make sure that we made this digestible for our elected officials too. So we also looked at what this data represented across council districts, because as you know, each council district has its own character. I think one council district's 90% residential, so that council district may not need as much attention in the multifamily initiative. So this really helped us focus our initiatives too, and helped us have conversations with elected officials on how they could help with this transition, which was an important component in making sure that this got done and this got funded. So another result of this amazing collaboration with our Clean Cities team was this replication guide. I know as one of the speakers highlighted earlier in the workshop, North Texas has over 100 cities, and we're more successful when we move together. So this replication guide was developed as a result of this collaboration and the analysis that we did on the multifamily project, so that other municipalities in our North Texas region could do something very similar. And it's available to download at the dfwcleancities.org website. Shameless plug. So after we pull together all that data, what do we do with it? There are quite a few initiatives fell out of this effort. One initiative that was particularly successful is we really targeted registered multifamily properties. There's also an ordinance in Dallas that required multifamily properties to recycle. And our code department requires specific multifamily units to register. So we had a pretty good list of where they were, who the property owners were. So we could do some direct outreach. So we did mailers. We did mailers specifically heavy in the gap areas, so that we could, make sure that we're looking at a more equitable distribution. We also work with the Greater Dallas Apartment Association. And this association provides services to multifamily, not only in Dallas, but in multiple counties. So the reach there extended beyond the Dallas border. And what we did with them was we worked on reaching their membership through webinars, which they had like monthly webinars where we were allowed to focus on this topic. We also put articles in their newsletter that went out to all their members. We were part of their social media and web announcements. That was another example of a successful collaboration there. We also worked with our housing department on multifamily low-income housing that they were developing to make sure that we could have charging stations incorporated there to help us fill some of those gaps. We presented this information in collaboration with our Clean Cities team to our Environment and Sustainability Committee, which is a committee of 7 of our elected officials. We also presented this recently to our commission, which are our subject matter experts who represent specific districts in Dallas. And this project got a lot of attention really quickly and grew legs. So we started getting calls from other municipalities outside of the North Texas area. And we were even able to collaborate with the British consulate in Houston to have this conversation with some of our international counterparts. So we've been sharing this study for a while, hoping for replication, because I think it really helps to fill a necessary gap. So let's see. Oh, another one of the really successful things that we did was we were able to have a presence at the annual trade association for the apartment association here in Greater Dallas and North Texas. And we talked to over 1,000 property owners, property managers, and really helped to start that conversation about how this amenity at their property adds value. And another big conversation starter was, at the time, there was funding available through the Volkswagen mitigation grant. So that was our big lead in. Not only is this going to add value to your property, but there's funding out there that can help you incorporate it. And that got a lot of people's attention. Just looking at the results of applications that came in for that grant from our North Texas area, the largest percentage came from multifamily developments, which is great news. So still working on this project, lots more work to do, still lots of gaps to fill there. Some of our next steps are, we want to engage more closely with our environmental commission because these are residents in specific districts that have connections where we can work together, leverage opportunities with businesses in that area and other multifamily facilities so that we can have more conversations about incorporating charging stations. And they can help us get the word out as new funding opportunities become available. And they're really excited about this opportunity too, because these are some of our greener neighbors, and a lot of them drive EVs and they want to see more publicly accessible stations in their districts. They're highly motivated. We want to work through our council offices. They just have a great platform and a great reach. We want to continue to partner with our zero waste team. They do classes for multifamily property owners on recycling. And this is a great opportunity to leverage and co-message on charging stations. We also want to stay on top of funding opportunities because we realize that this is a great way in the door. We're waiting for the next funding opportunity so we can rekindle our partnership with the Greater Dallas Apartment Association and start doing that outreach again, because that was really successful last year. We want to be able to highlight best practices, not just highlight, capture them. A lot of questions that we get from apartment associations are, who's doing this? How are they doing this? How is it going? So just being able to build that database of successful installations at multifamily developments and create that peer-to-peer conversation, I think will help with the transition as well. We're also wanting to collaborate more closely with the Dallas Housing Authority so that we can have conversations about getting charging stations in low-income multifamily units to try and fill that gap and help with that transition. Gosh, that was actually my last slide. So you're closer to lunch now.
Thank you, Far, for that really
Thank you.
excellent presentation, very timely. We'll do some questions. Feel free to sit at the table if that's going to be easier for you. And Lori and Mukesh, who is still part of our earlier panel, you're more than welcome, or chime in as needed if there are questions that might be more broad. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but okay, so do we have any questions online, Harshit, before we? Okay, so any questions in the room? Anyone? And if not, I will start. So I was just curious, in these discussions, you've done quite a bit of stakeholder interactions. And I was just curious about the general public. Is the need for charging facilities at multifamily kind of property something that comes up from the public as well? And what are sort of the perspectives?
So actually, usually during our budget cycle at the city of Dallas, we do public meetings, a number of public meetings in each of the council districts. And this is one of the hottest topics that came up. Charging stations. How is the city helping to add to the accessibility of public charging stations? And it really got elevated, and it got the attention of a lot of elected officials. So I think what we're seeing now in this space is a swell from, the ground up and the top down. So there's a lot of energy going into this initiative, and a lot of other things. This is just one area where there's just a lot of opportunity. But we're definitely hearing from the public that they want to see more publicly accessible charging stations in Dallas. Okay. Go ahead.
You touched a little bit on funding, and curious if maybe you can elaborate more on that. I think, obviously barrier being cost of infrastructure, cost of hardware is a big challenge, particularly in this space. So can you just talk a little bit more? Where do you see the funding opportunities, or what mechanisms can actually help offset some of that cost?
So I think one thing that was really successful when we initially launched this initiative is that there was funding available in round 2 of the Texas Volkswagen mitigation grant program. And I think that kind of got us in the door with a lot of multifamily establishments. And just knowing that there was assistance out there to help them with the installation. Another part of the conversation around funding, we were able to highlight the fact that this is an amenity that residents will pay to have at the property that they choose. So it became more of a benefit to the property to make that type of investment. I know even some apartments are looking at making this available at specific spots that people who live in that apartment, you rent your spot when you're there. So now you're paying extra for the spot that has the charging station. So there's some unique models out there, but we're hoping that what we learn from the best practices is that these things kind of pay for themselves to some extent too, with the supplements and with the addition of residents who are willing to pay more for this asset.
Work here too. I should know how to use it. One thing I would add on the funding, as Bar mentioned, they were able to leverage the availability of the Volkswagen money. Right now, anybody who is interested in having these conversations can leverage the enhanced tax credit for the alternative fuel infrastructure tax credit, which was just increased. So renewed and increased. So it's 30% up to $100,000 per location. And that's something that certainly multifamily properties and any for-profit entity can take advantage of. And I believe even tax exempt entities can take advantage, can claim it through a direct payment option. So that's something to keep in mind. Just lost my train of, The other piece is, kind of as Dr. Grossman was saying, there are other kind of maybe less obvious sources of funding. I think when you're talking about adding charging stations to multifamily properties, there is definitely an equity and an environmental justice and a Justice 40 element to that. So it may be something that doesn't necessarily rhyme with the title of a funding program that comes from X, Y, or Z agency, but could certainly fit into the scope of a wide variety of initiatives that are focused on increasing access to charging infrastructure. So I would just highlight that.
Can I also add that there's a charging and fueling infrastructure grant opportunity coming up in winter of 2023, and that's the 1.25 billion or million. $4 billion for 4 years. It's a competitive grant program, and they do talk about the grants being prioritized for low and moderate income neighborhoods and areas of high ratios and multi-unit dwellings. So it's a competitive grant. It's going to be available from Federal Highway later this year at 80-20% share. So just want to let you know.
I'm going to make two, excuse me, two observations first, and then ask you a question that I know both of you have already been asked this week. But a different answer, I hope. So you observed that 80% of current vehicle owners charge at home exclusively. That was on your slides. It's actually, we think, closer to 86%. It's the number I use. At my personal home, it cost me $383 total for both my level 2 charger and the electrician's installation. And so, you're not talking necessarily if you've got to have one in public that has the front end and the card swipe and the securities and this and that, it can run you $7,000, whatever. But I'm just pointing out that at your MDU parking spot behind a fence, it might be the less than $500 version of it. So with those observations, your analysis was based on the half a mile from the location of the premise in terms of whether or not there's proximity, which I would argue if I'm going to leave my vehicle somewhere to be charged for multiple hours, better not be more than 100 yards. What do you think the right answer is?
You're absolutely right. This question has come up a number of different times, and I think I think Lori gave the best answer of how this aligns with other research that's been done.
I was afraid of this question, which is why I came to join FAR at the table in the first place. So the half mile analysis radius that we used was based on, we were inspired by our colleagues that do sustainable development and transit-oriented development planning, where you're looking at the walkability to transit, and a half mile radius is something that our agency has used in the past looking at that. But agree, hindsight 2020, it's probably a little bit too far for, is this a place that I would leave my car? So I think if we were to go back and do it again, we would use something shorter. I don't know exactly what it would be, whether it's a shorter distance or whether it's like a walk, a walk time, what's a 5-minute walk, or, something that would be more probably realistic.
I think you wanted to say something.
This is on. Okay, I just had a quick question, just listening to your presentation, FAR, which I really appreciated. If you could maybe expand a little bit on the situation where you have funding programs that have the public access requirement, and how that would work if you have a multifamily housing that has like its own gated community. I'm sure you talked about that, but I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on that.
So that is one of the topics that came up during the webinars that we did with the Greater Dallas Apartment Association. Multiple complexes do have the gated scenario, and they were wondering how does that affect the public access? And, you know, we did explain to them that there are multiple ways to incorporate charging infrastructure into their property. And it was an interesting conversation. It was more like a workshop than just a webinar, because they were throwing out other ideas that we hadn't even thought of originally. I think that's originally where the idea that they could offer charging infrastructure in paid spots came up. And they could offer infrastructure in their soon-to-be resident spots that were open in the front area. I actually live in the CBD in Dallas and have strongly encouraged my complex to incorporate charging. And a year and a half later, there is now charging inside and outside the gate. So I think the residents of the units also have a voice in this. And they're starting to use it. So now we're starting to see charging infrastructure along the perimeter as well as inside the gate. I think there can be multiple applications.
Real quick question. Is anybody here got an update as to whether or not the PACE program in Texas, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, can fall under that now? I know they were working on it. Or do you even know what I'm talking about with the PACE program?
I know what you're talking about, and we actually asked the question recently, and now I'm drawing a blank on what the answer was.
Okay,
But
well,
we can follow up with
a
you.
little over a year, they were going to add EVSE to the list of approved equipment to put in. It'd be really cool if they did. Yeah, but we're waiting on that. Yeah, okay.
I will flag in terms of funding opportunities. There is a program called the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grants that has traditionally been for energy efficiency and conservation projects. And through the infrastructure bill, it was updated and expanded to now include purchase of electric vehicles and EV charging stations for eligible entities. So counties and cities are given a formula allocation. So if you are representing a county or a city and you are not familiar with that, let us know, because there's a whole spreadsheet posted online that just says city X is eligible for this much money. And there's a process to have to go through and file to claim it, but it is not a competition. That money is allocated to you. So that's another way that public entities could look for charging stations. And the fact that it was incorporated into an energy efficiency program gives me hope that the answer on the PACE question was yes, but we'll follow up.
Will all of these presentations be available to us? How would we get access to these?
That's up to the presenter. If you see the presenter nodding yes right now, then their presentation will be available.
And will be sent by email, correct, to all attendees?
Or put up online, I think Edgar.
Yeah, definitely. We'd like to share this presentation, and the replication guide that I spoke of earlier is also available online if you want to do a deeper dive into the data and the analysis portion.
We're going to get permission from the presenters, and then we'll send out an email. We're going to post them online.
Any
I
other?
had a question for Lori. Will there be any effort by the COG to develop a MPO level NEVI deployment plan, like a EV infrastructure deployment plan for your region? Or are you going to go by the state NEVI deployment plan and just and use that as a guide?
I'm not going to speak on behalf of the other COGs and MPOs, but I don't know if we intend to draft a full document the way the state did. I mean, if we are encouraged to do so, then we would oblige. But definitely there would be some sort of framework, right? Whether it takes the form of a formal narrative plan or just, you know, here's the criteria and here's our objectives and here's the methodology. We would have something to guide whatever it is that we develop for our recommendations for phase 2 that we coordinate with TxDOT.
So that information will be part of your long-range plan, MTP 2050 update, or where would you find that documentation?
Well, we don't have it yet. We're
Yeah.
we're just now embarking on development of all of that. I think integration with the mobility plan, I really appreciate my MPO colleague bringing that up. That's something that we need to figure out how to navigate.
Okay, looks like there is a question. Go ahead.
So there is one online question and it's about, so most charging happens at home or single family homes that can pay for power there from their regular electricity rate. But if multifamily housing have to pay for a public charger price, how do we get the price equity that would be needed for to encourage EV ownership in multi-family?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think price equity is a conversation that's just been ongoing in multiple scenarios. And I've seen different applications across Dallas at multifamily properties, like how are they, how's the charges working? A lot of them are lease scenarios where the complex itself isn't making money from the charging. So I've just seen multiple applications. I don't know if there's one easy answer to that. I don't know if you have anything that. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's kind of being handled almost on a case by case basis.
Hopefully our afternoon breakout session on equity considerations and EV charging will bring some people into the room who have some more answers to that. Nicely put.
May
have
somebody else chime in?
Absolutely.
As incentive to potentially participate in that part of the equity, and to your question exactly, everybody might not know the scope behind the question that was just asked. Even at my just residential rate, let alone if I was an entity that could purchase at commercial rates, which the electricity would be another 30% lower than that, at least. If you go to a level 2 charger, so this was that place that I've got to go half a mile to and may or may not be available and that I charge at, it's going to cost me 3 times as much as what I pay at home to charge there. If it's DC, 4 to 5 times as much for the fast charge. Be there as long, 4 to 5 times as much. So not quite twice as much as the AC level 2 type of charging. Let me contrast that to the fuel, combustion fuel. That's a markup of, instead of the 1 to 2% markup that you put on gasoline for infrastructure that is by all accounts exactly the same size. The cost of a pump versus the cost of a DC charger, the land, the permitting, the utilities, this, that, and the other. So instead of a markup of 1 to 2% on your gasoline, the energy industry electrification seems to believe that 400 to 500% is acceptable. So I'm just going to say, we don't know what this messy middle is going to look like, but I don't think the far end of it looks like what we're paying now, let alone what I pay at home versus public.
Okay, thank you. So, question? Yes, sir.
I gotta jump on your statement there about, 4 to 5 times more. Yeah, they charge more for the electricity. Our rule of thumb is the faster the charger, the bigger the charger, the more you pay for it. Okay, it's the convenience, but the brass tacks here is it's still going to be far cheaper than gasoline per mile driven. So as far as an economic impact and all of that, I don't think that really holds much water. All right.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm, if there are no more questions, oh, there is one. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Hi, yeah, this is maybe a small question compared to the scope of all of this, but is there any sort of like standardization or recommendation on how you go about like waiting in line for a charger? I know that some companies like have like an app where you can like wait list yourself, but I don't really want 20 apps for 20 different charging companies, you know? And I also don't want to park behind someone for 2 hours and wait for them to move. Do you know anything about that?
So I think we are in the messy middle Wild West phase of that. I just saw a post from a colleague on LinkedIn yesterday that they had just, for the first time, shown up at a charging station and ended up in a queue because there's now enough demand that people are waiting in line for chargers, and their commentary based on this is one person's personal experience. So let me just disclaimer that. I'm just saying this is what I'm aware of. Was there was no rule, like there was no you're next in line, like you're hovering, and so like you wait, and or the next person just drives in and just goes straight to the plug as the next person is backing out with no regard for the dozen people that are clearly idling over here. Well, you wouldn't know if they're idling if they're electric, right? But anyway, so I think it's a great question, and I think I'm really curious if there's opportunity when we come to NEVI design standards for like individual sites, if there could be some standardization to, hey, here's what the geometry of the site should look like, and here's what some striping could look like, so that there is a little bit more clarity, because the last thing we want is for there to have been all this time and attention put in on the technical design specs, 4x150, whatnot, so that there's a standard user experience, and then you throw the humans onto it, and the human behavior mucks it all up, right? Which human behavior does tend to muck a lot of things up. So I think it's a really good point. Great question.
I'll just quick follow up on that. Also, the final rule that came out last week has a little bit more information about the apps and the signage and the markings that are required. And the big picture apps is there is standardization required. So your fear of having too many apps on your phone should be allayed just a little bit. But the signage and markings is a little less clear. As far as I could tell, it's MUTCD compliant, but if you take a look at the most recent MUTCD, I don't think it covers queuing at EV charging stations. So that is definitely an area to continue to work on.
So I think we're about time to break for lunch. So Edgar, maybe over to you too.
So please join me one more time to thank FAR for our presentation. And so yes, we have lunch in the back. So everybody who registered ahead of time and had told us what they would like to eat, please try to remember what you told us 2 weeks ago. And then we will rejoin here at 1 p.m. for the breakouts. Thank you.
Give me time.